Welcome, my friends. Today I will share with you a story of love lost and found, a family's journey through hardship to healing. Enjoy the story. 9-year-old Emily Johnson sat on the worn plaid couch in the cramped living room of the tiny house she shared with her mother Sarah, on the outskirts of Williston, North Dakota. Faded yellow curtains blocked the late afternoon sun that threatened to bake the little room. "Mama, how come you never talk about my daddy?" Emily asked, her wide blue eyes studying Sarah intently. Sarah froze, nearly dropping the plate she was drying. Even after all these years, the pain still felt so raw. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Well, honey, your daddy, he fell in love with another woman when I was pregnant with you. And he left us. But why? Didn't he love you? Didn't he want me?" Emily looked at her with such innocence that it shattered Sarah's heart all over again. "Of course he wanted you, baby. Loving you had nothing to do with why he left. Your daddy he made some bad choices." Sarah set the plate down and came over to Emily, smoothing her daughter's unruly chestnut curls. Emily's brow furrowed as she processed this information. Even at her young age, she understood her family was different from those of her classmates. They all had daddies who came to school events and coached Little League. She didn't even have a daddy to put on the Father's Day card she made in art class last week. Well, if her own daddy didn't want the job, she'd just have to find a new one. Emily squared her little shoulders resolutely. She hated seeming weak or girlish, which is why she never wore dresses and only played with the boys at recess. She would find a way to replace her missing father figure, no matter what it took. Sarah collapsed into bed later that night, exhausted to her very core. Being a single mother was draining enough, but dredging up the painful memories of her failed marriage today had sapped her last reserves. She could still vividly remember the day she first met David's mother, Margaret. Sarah had been so nervous, wanting so badly to make a good impression on her new mother-in-law. But the disdain in Margaret's eyes as she looked Sarah up and down made it clear she had already been judged and found lacking. "Trash!" Margaret spat out as she picked disdainfully at Sarah's Walmart blouse. "You're just temporary trash David's slumming with." Sarah had been stunned speechless at Margaret's open hostility. Over the years, she tried her best to win over the imperious older woman, but nothing was ever good enough. Not the home-cooked meals, not the spotless house Sarah kept, and certainly not Sarah herself. When David had his terrible accident at the factory and needed an expensive operation they couldn't afford, Margaret had descended like a vulture. "I'll give you the chance," she told Sarah. "But only if you sell that little house your granny left you. Consider it payment for me fixing the mess you've made of my son's life." Sarah had reluctantly agreed, believing Margaret's smooth lies about only wanting to help them. She signed over the only thing of value she had, her pride and joy, the cozy cottage she had inherited from her beloved grandma and had dreamed of raising her own family in someday. David came home from the hospital a changed man, cold and cruel. He sneered at Sarah's swollen belly and accused her of cheating on him while he recovered. "Who's the father, he growled as he threw his plate of spaghetti against the wall. "Which of your trashy little boyfriends is my baby's daddy? Or do you even know?" "David, please, nobody else. It's only ever been you, I swear it," Sarah sobbed. "Liar!" he'd bellowed. "I found your secret stash of tight dresses and heels, you two-timing whore." Only later did Sarah discover Margaret had planted those clothes in their closet to enrage David and convince him of Sarah's imagined infidelity. In the end, David stormed out, filing for divorce, and Margaret watched in triumph as everything fell apart, just as she'd intended. Sarah wiped away hot tears as the painful memories washed over her. She couldn't change the past. All she could do now was focus on giving Emily the best life possible, even if it meant doing it alone. 3 months later, Sarah sat in the darkened living room feeding newborn Emily. She still couldn't quite believe she was a mother. Aunt Linda let her move into the little apartment over her garage when Sarah showed up 8 months pregnant with no money and no place to go. It wasn't much, but it kept a roof over their heads. Sarah had to give up her dream of being a literature teacher, forced to take a job as a milkmaid on Linda's farm instead, so she could afford diapers and formula. The work was hard, and Linda was a tight-fisted taskmaster, begrudging Sarah every penny, but they had food in their bellies and a safe place to sleep. Sarah knew it could be worse. She gazed adoringly at Emily, so innocent and tiny. "It's you and me against the world, baby girl, and I promise I will do whatever I have to give you a good life." "Give it back, trailer trash!" The taunt rang out across the schoolyard. 9-year-old Emily whirled around to see Jack Carter, the biggest bully in 5th grade, waving her beloved copy of The Secret Garden over his head. His 2 nasty friends guffawed beside him. Emily saw red. How dare they? She launched herself at the knot of boys, a whirl of flying fists and kicking feet. The yard monitor's whistle shrieked. Later, sitting outside the principal's office sporting a split lip, Emily waited for her mother. She knew she'd catch hell for fighting, but what choice did she have? She couldn't let those jerks walk all over her. "Emily Louise Johnson!" Sarah appeared, disappointment etched on her tired face. "What have I told you about fighting?" "They started it!" Emily protested. "They stole my book! I want my daddy!" The words spilled out before she could stop them, and Emily stared at the floor, ashamed of this babyish outburst. Sarah sighed and crouched down, tipping Emily's chin up to meet her eyes. "I know it's hard, honey, but your daddy's not here. It's just us." Sarah wrapped Emily in a hug, her own heart aching for the pain her little girl carried. "I will always protect you, Emily," Sarah vowed fiercely. "No matter what, I will keep you safe." If only Sarah knew how soon that promise would be tested. Emily hunched her shoulders as she trudged down the sidewalk. Her shoes pinched her toes, the tattered soles wearing through. The too small dress from the church donation bin rode up her skinny thighs. Suddenly, a hard shove from behind sent her sprawling. Jack and his cronies, the bane of her existence. Well, if it isn't little Emily Johnson," Jack drawled, leering at her. "Where do you think you're going, trailer trash?" "Leave me alone, Jack," Emily spat, scrambling to her feet. "I don't want any trouble." "Too bad, because trouble's what you're gonna get." Jack stepped in closer, cracking his knuckles menacingly. "See, me and the boys are bored, and we figured a little runt like you would be fun to rough up." His friends guffawed sycophantically, tightening the circle around her. Emily's heart raced with fear. She knew all too well what these bullies were capable of. "My big brother Pete taught me a few new fighting moves," Jack informed her with a nasty grin. "I've been looking for a punching bag to practice on." Emily didn't wait for him to make good on his threat. She kicked him hard in the shin and took off like a shot, their outraged bellows chasing her heels. Tears of rage and terror pricked her eyes as she ran blindly. No idea where she was going, only knowing she had to get away. She couldn't let them catch her, hurt her. But what was she going to do? Emily knew she had to find somewhere to hide. She couldn't outrun them forever, and if they caught her, they'd make her pay dearly for that kick. There had to be somewhere she could go, someplace they'd never look. The train. Emily had a wild idea. She could hop one of the freight trains that rolled endlessly through town, escape to someplace far away where Jack and his goons could never find her. She crept along the tracks, heart pounding, until she spotted an open boxcar. With a furtive glance around, she heaved herself up over the high edge, tumbling into a dark, musty interior. Emily curled into a ball behind some crates, praying the train would start moving before she was discovered. But luck was not on her side. "Hey, what are you doing in there?" An outraged shout. The conductor, shining a flashlight in her face, red and sweating with anger. "Kid, this ain't no free ride. You gotta have a ticket." Emily cowered under his wrath, stammering out an apology. "I'm sorry, mister. I didn't mean no harm. I just gotta get away from these boys chasing me." The thundering of feet outside the car made her blood freeze. "No, it couldn't be." But Jack's voice rang out, vicious with triumph. "She's in here. The little bitch went in the train." Emily scrabbled backwards desperately as Jack and his friends clambered into the car, cutting off her escape. The conductor gaped at the sudden chaos, clearly out of his depth. "Thought you got away, huh, freak?" Jack panted, fists clenched in anticipation. "Well, you can't run now, and we're going to teach you a lesson you won't ever forget." Emily backed away until she hit the cold steel wall of the train car, trapped. Her hand closed around the hard lump in her pocket, the pocket knife she had stolen from Aunt Linda's farm. She didn't want to use it, But she would if she had to. Jack and his buddies fanned out, slowly advancing with sadistic grins stretching their faces. "Nowhere to run now, runt. You're gonna get the beating of your life." The conductor wrung his hands, clearly wanting to intervene but unsure how to handle a bunch of enraged preteen boys. "Now let's everyone calm down," he tried nervously. "I'm sure we can talk this out." "Shut it, Grandpa," Jack snarled. "This is between us and her." He turned back to Emily, a merciless glint in his piggy little eyes. "I'm gonna enjoy this." Emily braced herself, the pocket knife slipping into her sweaty palm. This was it. She'd have to fight with everything she had. "That's enough!" A deep voice cracked like a whip. "Step away from the girl! Now!" A tall, imposing figure blocked the light from the open train door. A cop. Emily almost collapsed with relief. Jack paled and scrambled back. "We weren't doing nothing, sir, honest. Just messing around." "Can it, kid?" The cop grabbed Jack by his collar and heaved him easily out of the car. He cuffed the sputtering boy to the ladder rung. "Don't move a muscle," he warned Jack's stunned friends. "Backup's on the way and you're all under arrest for assaulting a minor." He turned to Emily, his expression softening. "It's okay now, honey. You're safe. I'm Officer David Keller. Can you tell me your name?" "Emily Johnson," she managed to whisper through the lump in her throat. The cop studied her intently, a strange emotion flickering across his rugged face. After a long moment, he held out a large, gentle hand. "Well, Miss Emily, you've had quite an ordeal. Let's get you home to your folks. I promise, those delinquents won't lay a hand on you again." Sarah paced the small platform, sick with worry. Emily should have been home from school hours ago. Horrible scenarios raced through her mind. Emily injured, lost, kidnapped. The wail of a siren reached her ears. Sarah whirled around and her knees almost buckled. A squad car rolled to a stop and the back door opened. Emily scrambled out, crying, "Mama! Emily!" Sarah crushed her daughter close, tears of relief soaking the little girl's hair. "My baby, what happened? Are you all right?" "She's had a difficult afternoon, but she's safe now," a painfully familiar baritone answered. "I made sure of that." Sarah's eyes snapped up, and the breath left her lungs as if she'd been sucker-punched. It couldn't be, but there he was, the man she'd tried so hard to forget. "David?" "Hello, Sarah." His deep rumble sent shivers down her spine, like it always had. His ice-blue eyes flicked to Emily, then back to her in dawning comprehension. "She's mine, isn't she?" Sarah swallowed hard and nodded mutely. David made a choked sound, his eyes closing briefly in regret. "I'm so sorry," he said hoarsely. "God, if I had known. I've been searching for you for years, ever since Mom told me the truth." Sarah sat rigidly beside David on the threadbare plaid couch, a chasm of hurt and betrayal yawning between them. Emily happily perched on David's lap, too young to understand the painful history. In the past few hours, he had become her white knight, the daddy she always yearned for. "When you left, Mom was gleeful," David explained, self-recrimination roughening his voice. "But her story about you cheating never quite added up. I kept finding little things that were off. Receipts for those trashy clothes in your size that I knew you'd never wear. A bogus bank statement Mom waved in my face as proof." He met Sarah's gaze squarely, his own eyes luminous with regret. "When I confronted her, she blurted out the truth. How she framed you, orchestrated everything to drive us apart. Because no one could ever be good enough for her precious boy." Sarah pressed her lips together hard, determined not to cry. It was the vindication she had hoped for so long, but it didn't change the years of struggle and heartache his abandonment had put them through. "I've been scouring the country for you ever since," David continued urgently. "I hired PIs, followed up on every possible lead, but you had vanished, until today when this brave girl led me right to you." He cuddled Emily tenderly. "I want us to heal, Sarah," he said softly, "to be the family we were always meant to be." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a check, pressing it into her hand. "This is the money for your grandma's house and then some. I'm sorry you had to sell it. Consider this a down payment on our future together. We can buy it back, or any house you want. Start fresh. Sarah stared at the check, the zeros blurring as hot tears spilled down her cheeks against her will. Could she do this? Risk her bruised, wary heart again? Allow this man back into their lives, into Emily's life. She looked at her little daughter, so valiant and strong, yet so starved for a father's affection and protection. Maybe David deserved a second chance. Maybe they all did. Emily bustled around the cramped kitchen, setting out their best chipped china and fussing with a wilted bunch of wildflowers. Her daddy was staying for dinner. Her young heart felt full to bursting. She still couldn't believe he had saved her, like a prince in the storybooks, and now he would be part of their lives again. She had missed so much. Father-daughter dances, his strong arms swinging her high, his deep voice reading bedtime stories, but they had forever now to make up for lost time. "My Emily," David murmured, pulling her into a tight hug. "My brave, beautiful girl." She let herself sink into his embrace, treasuring the rare feeling of complete safety. As he prepared to leave, David turned to Sarah. An unspoken question hung in the air between them. "One day at a time," Sarah said quietly. "We have a lot to work through. But I want to try." Hope and tenderness cracked through David's steady composure. He reached for her hand. "I meant what I said, Sarah. You and Emily will never want for anything again. I will spend my life making things right, being the man you both deserve. My family will never face hardship alone, not while I have breath in my body." He held her gaze, letting the vow settle into her bones. With a soft kiss to her knuckles, he slipped out the front door and into the velvet night. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, the evening breeze cooling her flushed cheeks. The future was uncertain and more than a little frightening. A cop's wife was never an easy thing to be, but for the first time in a long time, her heart felt light. She had her little girl. She had her integrity and grit, and maybe, just maybe, she had her husband back too. A family, hers, not perfect or conventional, but real. Together they could weather any storm. As long as they had each other, anything was possible, even second chances, even happily ever after. Golden autumn sunlight dappled the park, the distant shrieks of children's laughter ringing out beneath the canopy of changing leaves. In the middle of the grass, a small family picnicked on a red-checkered blanket, a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" Emily squealed from the tire swing David was pushing. Her dark curls flew behind her as she soared up to the blue sky, her little face radiant with unbridled joy. David complied with a grin, putting his back into it. "You've got an adrenaline junkie here, Sarah. Might have to buy her a parachute for her birthday." Sarah smiled, contentment filling up all the hollow places in her soul as she watched her husband and daughter play. The past few months hadn't been easy. There had been hard conversations, painful revelations, old wounds reopened and finally cleansed. But through it all, they had clung to each other. David had been true to his word, moving heaven and earth to keep his family safe and cared for. And slowly, tentatively, Sarah had learned to trust him again, to let herself love him again. "Okay, my intrepid explorer, I need a break." David collapsed dramatically on the blanket, pulling Emily down into his lap and tickling her until she giggled breathlessly. "Daddy, stop!" she gasped between peals of laughter, and he relented, hugging her tight instead. "Never," he smiled into her hair. "I'll never stop loving you, Emmy Bear. Not ever." Sarah met his eyes over their daughter's head, her own shining with unshed tears. She had spent countless nights praying for a moment like this, for the three of them to be together, a family, and now it was here, her wildest, most desperate dream come true. David reached for Sarah's hand, tugging her to nestle against his other side. He wrapped his arms around both of his girls, cocooning them in his strength and love. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," he murmured. "That I get to have you both, after everything. I won't ever take it for granted. You two are my whole world." Sarah laid her head on his broad shoulder, listening to Emily's sweet giggles and David's resonant heartbeat under her ear. Maybe there was no such thing as a perfect family. Maybe every couple had their struggles, their broken places, But in that golden moment, Sarah felt certain that every tear, every lonely night, every sacrifice had been worth it, because it had led her here, to her own little piece of paradise, a devoted husband, a delighted child, a family pieced back together with forgiveness and hope and unconditional love. It was messy and hard-won and a little bit miraculous, and it was hers. Snuggling deeper into David's side, Sarah thought her heart might just burst with sheer happiness. The three of them had been to hell and back, but they had made it, together, and she knew that whatever life threw at them next, they would face it the same way. As a team, forever.